Okay, so am I recording the right place? Yes, I am. Okay. So a couple things I wanted to point out. Like I mentioned before, we had talked about this before, where um, you have we have this app config object that's being created with these attributes and properties, and the root path right here. So this is, again, I had mentioned this before about how we were producing data here, and then and actually we had two places we're producing data as well in the init framework, because we call init framework from here, which goes to there, which we're producing additional data here. And it's kind of building upon the data that was generated the first time. So it's a little bit of data consumption, but mostly producing additional data. And then this is all passed off to the init framework schema in the warden, which comes into here. And now we're consuming data, the data that was produced in these other two files. So again, it comes back to the idea of data consumption, data production, and data consumption. Now you saw I uncommented that, so I probably want to do that. Make sure that that's done. And then, let me see, I can't see your screen right now. There it is. Okay, I see your screen. And when we come over to Chief Configuration, where we're going to set up configuration in here, we're actually consuming that data again, right? And I'm going to uncomment this, the set configuration setting on the configurator. So we're actually consuming the data, but we're actually reproducing it at the same time. So we're taking that data and we're storing it in this as a configuration setting. So you can see, yeah, that I would go ahead and uncomment that, because we're gonna like expand on that now. So yeah, we're reproducing the data as a consumption, and down here, when we go to call chief data setup all JSON config data, we're actually going to be reconsuming the data that we're reproducing. So it has this connotation. Hang on just a second. I think Hannah's joining the other meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so you get the idea that we're reproducing this data and storing it so that it can be used again somewhere else, because once we get it as, here we're taking them as parameters, right, to the function, but we don't necessarily always want to be able to do that. We want to be able to store it someplace where everywhere can access it, so we can always access this data that we need without having to pass it to our functions. And that's the concept of data storage, which we're about to get into. And we may as well just go ahead and do that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Let me make sure your screen, there, I see your screen. So you saw I uncommented those so that we can actually comment that, because that's what we're going to go implement next. And this is the beginning of the actual configuration. So from here, under Xutrix, I'm going to make a new file called configurator.js. Okay, and the configurator is basically going to be where we store configuration data. So */ and I'll go ahead and make a header for this at file configurator.js at module configurator, and a description which is going to say contains the functions necessary to set and get configuration settings from the shared data structure. Okay, so we're going to store data in this data structure. Requires module data, and then we need a path. So that's going to be this one right here. I'll just copy all of this. Okay, so we got our path. My name, today's date is 10th. Okay. And we're going to need a D data structure. So say let D equals require. We haven't created this yet, but we're about to. Structures / data. And then the rest of this is path, and the rest of that is this stuff over here. Okay, so we got our path, and then we'll have this D, and D is going to be our data structure. And we're going to need to implement that as well. I'll let you go ahead and make sure you get this implemented. This has to change to Xetrix. Xetrix dot base file name dot, so that changes. And we may as well go ahead and implement our data structure as well. So under structures, we're going to make a new file, and we'll call it data.js. And we'll have another header, as usual, /** at file data.js at module data lowercase d. Description is a little bit involved here, but it's going to say contains the singleton data structure definition that allows the entire application to share data between various components of the framework and greater application platform. Okay, author and date 2022/01/10. Okay, and then we got our copyright information. Okay, and it's going to be very simple here. We're just going to say let data equal open close curly brace and module.exports equals curly brace, and we're going to call it data, and it's going to export data. So that's it. That's all we need to do. It's pretty darn simple. And the simpler the better. That gets rid of a lot of extra complicated stuff. And we'll implement some additional data structures, but this will be the base one. A lot of the other stuff will get implemented off of this. Okay, so going back to the configurator, this is where we're going to go ahead and use that data that we've implemented, because we've got the require right here. So first we're going to have a function called set configuration setting. And it's going to take two parameters. It's going to take a configuration name and a configuration value. So this is the most basic configuration system. We're just going to have a getter and a setter. A set configuration function, and we'll have a function get configuration setting, and that one's just going to take a configuration name. Okay, let's go ahead and do the headers for this one. So the first function is going to have at function set configuration setting. Yep, you got configuration name, configuration value, and the description is going to say sets a configuration setting on the configuration data structure stored on the D data structure. Oops, let me collapse this so you can see a little bit better. Okay. Data type here is going to be string. And configuration name is the key of the configuration setting. Oops, I need a lowercase s here. And configuration value. This one could be a number of things. It could be a string, and we use a pipe, a vertical pipe indicator, which is it's the alternate character for the backslash key. It's between the backspace and the enter on the keyboard. On a Mac, I think it is, the key is, yeah, also below the delete and above the return key. Is a vertical pipe, so string, and it indicates in the data types here, it indicates an OR. So we could have a string type, we could have an integer type, or Boolean type, or a double, and technically we could also have an object here, but I'll leave that one off for now. And the description for the configuration value is the value of the configuration setting. And we'll do my author, sign my name here, same as always, date 2022-01 and 10. Okay. I'll try to keep that on screen while you're working on it. I'm going to work on the getter. So here we're going to have /* this is at function get configuration setting, and the description. Fortunately, we only have a getter and a setter here. Later on, we're going to implement basically a hierarchical based configuration system, which will have a tree structure, and it'll be a lot more sophisticated. But also, the fact that it is going to be more sophisticated is going to allow us to scale a lot better. If we just use a getter and a setter here, we basically have a flat configuration system, and it doesn't scale as good as we would as we're going to need it to. It works really good for very small setups. But our system is going to scale enterprise, and so we definitely are going to need something more sophisticated than this. But this also gives us a starting point. Like you can get your head around a very simple getter and a setter. Once we start to look at tree structures, it gets a lot more sophisticated. Okay, so the description here is gets a configuration value based on the configuration name. So you just use a name as a lookup and it returns a value. Alright, so the parameter here is going to be a string. The description for that one is the key of the configuration setting. And the return type is going to be just like what we had before. String, a pipe, integer, pipe, Boolean, pipe, double. And the description for the return is the value of whatever was stored in the D, and I'm doing a square bracket here, configuration, period. And I'll do my name. And remember, this one only takes a single parameter. You have a configuration name and value. You should only need the one value. The return is what's going to have that string integer double. Okay, date 2022-01-10. And we're going to need to copy paste one of these other functions. I guess this set configuration would do. Just copy paste that and drop it in right in here for each of these. So I guess we'll start with set configuration, and we can just make sure we gut it after we're done. First of all, we don't need this stuff, and all the way up to there. So all of that can go. And the function name needs to be set configuration setting dot name, same as we always do. And configuration name is the first parameter, so paste that one in there. Configuration value is the second parameter, so we'll paste that one in there. And then we're going to say let configuration data root equals D. So we're capturing our D data structure configuration. And what this is going to do is it's going to get the configuration root out of the D data object. And actually, that could actually not return anything. It's possible that the configuration data root doesn't even exist. So I'm going to say if not configuration data root, then we're going to go ahead and create it. So D configuration equals open close curly brace, and that'll create it. And now we can go ahead and get it again, because now it should be something. We don't need to copy that with the let. We're just going to say it like this, because we've already done the let, so it's been declared. Even if it got something undefined, now it's going to actually have something defined with it. Yes. Okay, so next, configuration data root. We're going to actually reference the configuration name, which was passed in as one of the inputs. And we're going to set that equal to the configuration value. So that is actually going to store our value on a data object that is named the same as the configuration name. And all of that will be part of this configuration data root object on the D data structure. So I'll let you get caught up with that a little bit. Yep, we need to make sure it's not null or undefined. And so it's basically, now we're doing the same thing we did on line 32, but this time we're not going to fail because we just created something on that object. And so now that we've created something, we have something, so now we can actually reference that something to go and store our configuration setting. And if it didn't fail, then we're not going to go create it or empty it out because it's not going to hit that case. Okay, so yep, that's a pretty simple set configurator. The get configuration has a little bit more logic to it. I'm going to just copy paste the setter, and I'll just paste that right into the getter, and then we'll clear out the guts of it again. This time we only have one input, so I'm going to leave this configuration, rest of this off, and even this needs to go. And the get configuration setting is the name changes right there. And we still have the begin, we still have the configuration name, and we still have the end. A couple things we got to do differently. We got to say let return configuration value, and we're not declaring or assigning it to anything. And we say if the configuration is not equal to undefined, if the configuration, and this time now we're going to reference the name, configuration name is not equal to undefined, and we return configuration value equals the configuration. Oops. to say configuration name. Here we need an else. Return configuration value equals undefined. And we're going to have a second else that does the same thing. You might be able to simplify this a little bit. There's probably a better way of doing the logic. Return configuration value equals undefined. And now we need a console log for that guy. So console.log. And we can copy paste this line up here. And we're going to say return configuration value. So we're logging that return configuration value, but then we need to actually go and return it after we call the console log end. So we're indicate, because once you do the return, then there's nothing else. So return return configuration value. Yep, that should do it. And finally, we have a module exports. Exports equals our usual stuff. So here we'll have set configuration setting. We got to make sure we get both parameters in here. Configuration name, configuration value with an arrow function. Calls set configuration setting and passes the same stuff. Configuration name and configuration value. Oh, need the comma. Okay, and for the getter, get configuration setting. One parameter, configuration name. Get configuration setting, configuration name. Okay, so that's the end of our getter and setter for our configuration system. If we go back to the chief configuration, the next thing we have to do is uncomment these two lines for chief data. And we're going to go implement those in the chief data file, which we need to make. So we need to make a new file under controllers called chief data. Controllers chiefData.js. And this will be the master controller for our data. So header first, file chiefData.js. Add module, chief data, and description. Oops. Contains all the functions to manage the loading and processing of data. New line here will say such as XML files, CSV files, or JSON files. Additional file type processing should be added in this module. And the rest of it we can copy and paste. Oops, header, file header. There we go. Like I said, this will be our very high level our chief data controller. We're going to have other low level stuff that's responsible for low level data processing, file operations, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and write this function out. Actually, we need some dependencies first. So. We're probably going to have to add them up here as well. Let data broker equal require /brokers data broker. And let configurator I did add these two requires up here because we're going to need them here.
I gotta go to the gym.
So module data broker, module configurator. The configurator is require Citrix configurator. And the rest of it we can copy from the other side. So path, base file name, and chief data goes from the contractors. So we're good there. Yeah. Okay. The data broker is going to be our next layer in the file structure or the file calling. It's many layers, but many layers also give us a lot of modularity. So next, we need a new function called setup all JSON config data. It'll take two parameters, data path configuration name and a context name. Okay, the header for that should look like this. /** that function set up all JSON configuration. And the description sets up all of the JSON data at the specified configuration.
Okay, let's see here.
Okay, so it'll take a string for input 1, data path configuration name is the name of the configuration setting that has the path we should search. And the second parameter is also a string. Context name. Description is the context name that should be used when adding data to the data structure. And it's going to return an object. The description of the object is a JSON object that contains all of the data that was loaded and merged together. And I'll put my name on here. And the date. So basically that data path configuration name is the name of the setting that we should get the next configuration path at, because it's already been stored. It's just we're telling it now where to find it and reconsume it. Yeah, and I'm going to copy paste the contents of this function. Paste it in there. And I'll just wipe out the contents of all of this. Okay, and the function name changes to set up all JSON config data. And we've got the parameter name changes to data path configuration name and context name. And I'm going to leave this last one in here because I'm going to do something. We're going to have to declare a new return object, and we may as well log it. And so the next thing we need is to say let loaded and merged data all files equals, open close curly brace, let data path equal configurator dot get configuration setting, and we're going to pass it the data path configuration name, which was passed in as input. We'll pass that on as the name of the configuration setting that we want to get, and that's going to give us the data path because we set the data path as part of our what I mentioned before, how when data was reproduced. Now we're re-consuming it right here on this line. Okay. We're going to say data path equal path dot resolve data path. Make sure it resolves locally on your system. And then we say let files to load, because there could be a whole bunch of files to load. We don't know how many files. We're going to let the data broker help us figure that out. Dot scan data path. I'm going to pass it to data path and the context name. And then we say loaded and merge all data files equals data broker dot load all JSON data. And we're going to pass it the list of files to load. There could be a bunch of them. And the context name. Okay. And then this loaded and merged data all files, I'm going to console log that as, make sure I get this JSON.stringify. Yep, you got it. Okay, that's good. And then when all of that is done, we need to return loaded and merged all data files. And that has to be returned. Okay, so we need a module exports for all of this. Module.exports equals open close curly brace, square bracket, set up all JSON config data, and then we pass it our two parameters, data path configuration name and context name. Arrow function, set up all JSON config data, and we need both of these, data path configuration name and context name. Same as before. There we go. Now, the next thing we do is we need a new file for brokers, data broker. So under brokers, we'll make a new file. dataBroker.js. Okay, and here, header at file dataBroker.js, at module dataBroker, at description contains all of the lower level data processing functions, and also acts as an interface for doing file operations, for calling file operations. Okay, at requires module file operations. At requires module configurator. And then the usual path stuff we always have. Alrighty, yes. Configurator, data broker, okay. So once we've got the data broker, we need let file operations equals require Citrix. We're going to have to make this file operations. And let configurator equal require Citrix configurator. And then with the rest of this is the same as we always do with the path and the base name. And the difference is instead of controllers, it's now brokers. And there'd be a number of functions we need here, and they're a little bit more involved. We actually need 3 functions. So function scan data path. Data path is the parameter. Oops, I need to make that come down by 1. Okay, and the header for that looks like this. Function scan data path. Description scans the specified path and returns a collection of all the files contained recursively within that path and all subfolders. So you remember we talked about that recursive function for doing the factorial. Well, this is going to be another recursive function. So this is where it pays to know how to write recursive functions. It's going to take a string, I mean not in this particular function, but the function that this one calls most definitely. So the data path description is the path that should be recursively scanned for files in all the folders. And the return parameter is going to be an array of type string. So return is described as an array of strings that each have the full path and file name at all levels of the specified path, including subfolders. And I'll sign it. And date it. Oops, I made a typo. And I'm going to go ahead and copy paste contents of another function into chiefData.Broker, scan data path. And I guess I only need the first input. And we do need 2 because there's going to be return, so I'm going to do that. Scan data path can go right here. So the function name will need to change this first data parameter. That gets pasted in. Data path. I have it here. Don't worry about what I'm calling it. Don't worry about that because I'm gonna create a new. Say let files found equals file operations dot read directory contents, and we're going to pass it the data path. Okay, so now files found is what we want to console log here with the JSON stringify. And then we do need to return files found. And we're ready to start the next function, which is function load all JSON data. It's going to take two inputs, files to load, and context name. Okay, and the header for that, at function load all JSON data, and description is going to say loads all the contents of all files and folders and subfolders at the specified path and builds a list. Then loads them accordingly in the D context name. Let me collapse that so you can see a little better. Okay. First param is an array of string, which is those are files to load. So description is the data structure containing all of the files to load data from. The context name is a string, and the description is the context name that should be used when adding data to the D data structure. And it's going to return an object. A JSON object that contains all of the data that was loaded and parsed from all the input files listed. Okay, assign my name and date. So 110. Okay, I'll say list, input files list. This is a pretty big function. It has at least one giant, really big note in it. We probably should start a little bit on the loggers and a little bit on the timers, just because those are interconnected. And I think then we're pretty close to being done, except with just maybe a few more files, but nothing major. Getting close to being done with training 1. And I'm really glad that you're able to keep caught up here, because now we'll just proceed right into the next one, and this will just keep going and going. So I think this is going to give us some good cadence. All right, man. Well, you have a good evening. Appreciate it.